Hello, it's Sarah from Hardcover Hearts, and I'm here today with a kind of chatty video. I had a few things that I've been thinking about, and so I thought I would take it to BookTube and share it with you all and see what you all think about this. So what I want to talk about today is the idea and concept of something that I didn't know even existed until I joined BookTube. And this is the concept of a buddy read and group reads. Having been a crazy super reader for my entire life, to finally work up the nerve to join BookTube a year ago, and then to hear about all of these things called buddy reads and seeing people read with other people, I was immensely curious to see what was this? Why would people do that? How does that differ from how we do with book clubs or just reading a book and talking about it with friends? I wasn't sure how this very introverted experience becomes so social, both from a buddy read perspective and a group read perspective. Because I'm curious and because of the way that I am, I decided, okay, well, let's try one. So I put out a call for a few books that I wanted to read that I thought would be really good to read with other people. And I think I had like 5 books that I did a call for participants to see if anyone would read it with me. And immediately I had different people who were interested in different books. And so everything just kind of lined up perfectly. And I have to say, it has changed my reading life. And so the reason I wanted to talk about this is because I know there are a lot of people who don't have channels, and I want to empower you and kind of expose this a little bit in case you haven't done it with a booktuber and you want to do it with people that you know in your community that are book readers. Or if you ever see a book that I mentioned or someone talking about a book in my comments, I think it's also wonderfully appropriate for you to ask fellow commenters if they want to read something with you. But I know it's really scary to do that because like I said, this is a very introverted experience. So to all of a sudden invite someone into that with you, it can be a little intimidating. But I want to kind of talk a little bit more about it. So the first thing that I couldn't figure out was, well, how do you communicate? What is the method? And very clearly, very early on, it became obvious that Voxer, the phone app that people used. So Voxer is a kind of a walkie-talkie type thing. And it's very convenient because it's anonymous. You don't have to have it connected to a phone number or anything like that. And so I'm there as Hardcover Hearts, and I can have conversations that are just waiting for me when I have the opportunity to check in. So you can either text someone and leave a text message, or you can talk into the phone and it'll record your voice for 15-minute increments. And believe me, I found that out the hard way a couple times, where just blabbing on and then all of a sudden look down and realize that I didn't realize I was not being recorded because I'd hit that threshold. But it ends up being incredibly convenient, especially if you're having conversations with people across the globe. Because you don't have to worry about time zone. You don't have to worry about trying to catch up to a certain time. You just leave your message when you want to. And usually you're leaving messages at a designated time. And so the idea is that you would get a look at the book and get a gander at the size, figure out with your partner, your buddy read partner, what's the pace with which you want to read. I have learned that for me, I prefer a longer pace. So I usually like to start a buddy read at the beginning of the month, and especially if it's a meaty book, continue it through the month. So in essence, dividing whatever the page length by 4 and doing check-ins to whatever chapter most closely associates to that, and read to that, and then have your check-in on a weekly basis. The reason that I prefer that is that it allows me to be able to leisurely read the whatever the assigned reading for that week is. And I still have enough time to read other things in between. So for me, longer spans means that I just have more time to catch up. And often I'll read my prescribed set of reading a couple days before because I'd like it to be fresh in my head. I tend to text that the following voice message will be a check-in message. That because what ends up happening, and this is what's so lovely about a buddy read, is that you end up talking about life. You end up catching up and seeing how people are doing and finding out what's going on in their lives, what the weather is like in their part of the world, what other things they're reading. And so it ends up being a little bit of an opportunity to bond and meet other people through the act of reading a book together, which is absolutely delightful. I find that throughout the week, I'll be checking in and maybe leaving comments here and there based on other things that happen that make me think of that person, or maybe a new piece of information about something we're reading came into play, and I'll send that. It really helps to separate out just the chatty messages from the check-in message, which is kind of like the official business of a buddy read. There's no rules. For me, I like to kind of give a summary of what I think happened. That's really good for me to kind of reorient myself to the book from a plot perspective. I like to talk about the characters and the setting. Oh, and also themes. I like to talk about what themes started to pop up. And then if the book is really rich with detail and or sentences and delightful writing, I like to point out little references to sentences that meant a lot to me, or made me think of something, or that I think could be precursors or foreshadowing for something else. And what I find when I do that is I'm reading it much more closely as I'm going along, because I'm looking for those things to share. I'm anticipating the conversation. And so it makes me a much more disciplined reader as I go along. I absolutely love when someone catches something that I never would have seen. And that conversation that happens from their check-in to me allows me to kind of regroup and reground myself as I start to look forward. And so it gives me an opportunity to almost do a reset in how I'm going to be reading moving forward. And there's some times when you may not agree. You know, they may have a strong opinion that something's going to happen, or that this character is a certain way, and you may not agree. But what's so fascinating is that seed being planted in your mind then allows you to look for it and to validate, is it true or not? A lot of times even some of the best book clubs that I've been a part of, when you finally talk about it, at that stage, you've all finished the book. And so there's no opportunity, unless you're going to go back and reread it, to really go back with those fresh eyes. And so I think that has been invaluable to me as I'm going through some of these books. Now let's talk about the books. I could be crazy here, but I don't think that every book merits a buddy read. And what I mean by that is that if it's, plot heavy book, you can have a great time reading it together and just kind of checking in and all of that. But really what you're doing is just more leveraging the book as a means to have conversations about life and just get to know somebody. That's very different than I'll do two examples. When I read The Leopard by Giuseppe di Lampedusa, I read that with one of our frequent commenters, Amelia, who's brilliant. And she was able to show me all of these layers that she knew, because she lives in Europe and she had understanding of Italian history that I had no clue about. I was completely ignorant of. But she also had a best friend who had married a Sicilian. And so she had cultural references that she was able to explain contextually to me as we were reading it. That was valuable. Another book was the Quincunx, and I read this with Teresa, also another frequent commenter. And the Quincunx is like a puzzle. It's by Charles Palliser. it's like this massive puzzle, and it's Dickensian, and there's all of these books and all of these families, and how do these families work together, and it's so intricately done, and there's all this foreshadowing, but then you're not sure is that truly a foreshadowing, is it a red herring, what do we think, and being able to read it in chunks and then check in with her and what did I catch, what did she catch, how do we look through it. I mean, it made it a masterful, wonderful experience. And so those are two very, very different types of book. One is, the Leopard is considered a Italian modern classic, and the Quincunx is a very artful historical mystery. But known to be a challenging book. Those were prime, fantastic examples of really great books to read with a buddy reader. And then there have been other ones that I've read that it's nice to talk to people and to read and talk to, but there's not a lot of meat on the bones for discussion. And sometimes you just don't know until you're reading the book, and then you just have to determine, okay, are we going to continue to talk about it, or are we just going to kind of just know that we'll check in and see how the other person's feeling about it and go from there. Another thing that happens sometimes is maybe you start reading it, you realize that you just really don't want to continue with this book. I think it's really important to set the case with your buddy reader that at any time, either of you are free to step away from the book and just to say, Uncle, wave the white flag and say, this is not for me. I think I'd like to step away from this, because there's going to be other books and you're going to have other opportunities to do buddy reads with somebody, especially if you have tastes that are similar things. And I think from an etiquette perspective, from what I understand is that certain things are, obviously, you don't want to check in with material that the other person hasn't yet read. And so you have to pace yourself. And you have to be okay with someone maybe not being able to keep the schedule based on their lives. And there have been times where the person wasn't able to get back to it in a reasonable amount of time, and they felt bad and said, you know what, just go on without me, it's totally fine. And we ended up having future buddy reads. So it's not anything that should wreck a friendship or a burgeoning friendship. And of course, you never want to belittle anybody's point of view or downgrade how they're reading. There is no, I believe this to the core of my being, that there is no right way to read a book. We come to books based on who we are, our experiences, our histories, our preferences, our taste. And so when you read a book with someone else, what you're doing is you're getting to know them through literature and a text, which I think is fantastic. And so it's a balance between meeting this person and finding out who they are, and finding out what this text is all about. And I think that balance needs to be maintained as you go through, and there needs to be a sense of respect there as a fundamental. So that's with buddy reads. Let's talk about group reads for a moment. So I find group reads can be really different. So I've done a few group reads and I really enjoy them, but they're different experiences, and they change based on the collection of people who choose to participate. So an example, so I led a group read for The Goldfinch by Donna Tartt last year. Just one reader and I both did that together. And it was a great experience. What I find is that there tends to be a mixture of characters in a group read. Is sometimes hard, and sometimes people get intimidated, or sometimes the first people who make the comments tend to make the biggest comments, and then sometimes there's not really a lot for other people to say. And so I think it's always important to keep in mind that maybe make one or 2 points if it's a very big buddy read, a group read. I'd say if there's more than 4 or 5 people in the group, maybe kind of make 1 or 2 points and then listen and allow other people some space to make points as well. If it's a good book or a good, I should say, if it's a good buddy read, group read book, there'll be things to discuss that other people can come to it with. And you also want to allow for some healthy dialogue where people may disagree on something, and exploring that, and being curious as to how people are coming to those conclusions and what is making them think that, and all of that good stuff. But at the same time, you also want to be aware, as the person who may be leading it, if tensions start to seem a little fraught, you might need to go in and soften or ease things up a little bit. It's harder to get to know people in a group like that. There'll always be some people who will never say a word in a group, but they're there to listen. I just hope that the people who participate from that aspect are enjoying it and finding some value in it as well. Only challenge with a group is that the group really has to be defined early on, because once you start the Voxer group, anybody you add on after you've opened the group, they will never see the information that's done before. And so there ends up having this, I learned this the hard way, you have to reintroduce that person to everyone and set the context of what they missed. And so it ends up being kind of a bummer for the other people who were there earlier, because they have to deal with the repetition. So I tend to kind of really define when my lockdown phases of when I'm going to create the group and not add other people in. I found that some of the best participants in the group reads are people who can bring auxiliary ideas or material into the conversation. So you learn about other people's interests or their travels. In some group reads that I've had, you had people who have traveled to that place where we're talking about in the book, and they have something that is of reference that allows us to get a better picture, glean a little bit more insight, or kind of see things in a different way. And so I think that that's really wonderful, and it's almost like learning in a classroom where there's all these other extracurricular things that start to come in that help you form an opinion about something. And I find that to be absolutely delightful. I also think that for me, the group reads that I like the most are group reads where we're looking at multiple books. And so it's either the book is so intense, like The Goldfinch, where there's just so much in there to dive into, or a group read that I'm doing currently is with 18th century women novelists. And so I have a few people who are joining me through the entire 4-month process of reading the 4 books. I think that's delightful because we can draw inferences on all based on what we learned from the other books, which I think is fantastic. But at the same time, not everyone has to be in every one of those sessions. I think I'm going to do one probably in the fall for the quartet of Ali Smith, her seasonal quartet, because I find that might be really ripe and rich material to do a small group read with, because she tends to write experimentally, but she is purposeful in how she writes and how she constructs things, and she has a message that she's trying to get out. And my understanding also is that there are threads and themes that aren't just isolated in each novel, but threaded throughout the quartet. Really interested to spend some time playing with that. Another group read that I'd like to set up will be for a selection of Samuel Pepys' diaries, a historical look at London in his time, and then also his biography by Claire Tomlinson, which I think is supposed to be excellent. So I think those will be, I'm not sure when I'll do those two, but I'd like to do those two sometime this year as well. That's all I wanted to say about buddy reads and group reads. I would love to know, do you have any questions? What have been your experiences with buddy reads and group reads? And did you know they existed before BookTube? Any other ways that you like to do them that I haven't mentioned? Are there tips and tricks that you'd like to share? So please leave any and all of that in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching. I'll look forward to talking with you again another time. Bye.